My daughter-in-law left for a 10-day business trip to Jeju. The morning her taxi turned the corner at the end of our alley, my son, who had not taken a single step in 7 years, walked into the kitchen, put both hands flat on the counter to hold himself up, and told me we had to get out of the house before she came back. I dropped my cup. It broke on the tile. Blue and white pieces. The good one, the one my husband bought me in Icheon the spring before he died. Neither of us looked down at it. In 7 years of being careful, 7 years of catching things before they fell, of wiping up before anyone noticed, of keeping every surface in that house smooth and quiet, I let a broken thing lie where it landed, and I did not look at it. Before I go any further, do something for me. Take a breath, just one. Put your shoulders down from around your ears, wherever you are. And if you'd be kind to an old woman, press that like button. Subscribe if you're new here. And in the comments, tell me where you're watching from tonight. I read them, all of them. Last week somebody wrote from a night shift at a hospital in Manila, and somebody else from a kitchen table in Ohio at 4 in the morning, and I thought about both of them for 2 days. Now let me introduce myself properly, because we're going to be together a while. My name is Yoon Mi-suk. I am 71 years old. I live in Gangdong-gu, in the east of Seoul, in a 2-story house with a persimmon tree in the yard that I did not plant and cannot bring myself to cut down. For 33 years, I was a fire investigator. I know how that sounds. When I say it to people my own age, they tilt their heads like they've misheard me. When I started, in 1979, there were no women doing it, not one. I was hired as an administrative clerk for the Seoul Fire Service, and I spent 4 years typing up other people's reports before a section chief named Im Byung-chul, a rough, unhappy man who never once said a kind word to me, looked at a report I'd finished and said, "You changed the conclusion." I had. The investigator wrote electrical. I typed electrical because that was my job, but I'd made a small pencil mark in the margin, and when he asked me what it meant, I told him the burn photographs showed the deepest charring at the base of a wall that had no wiring in it, and fire climbs. Fire does not crawl down. Whatever started that one started low, and it started on the floor. He stared at me for a long time. Then he said, "Come to the next scene. Don't touch anything. Don't talk." That was my entire career, beginning right there. 33 years of standing in wet black rooms that used to be somebody's life, reading the story the fire left behind. Because a fire always leaves the story behind. People lie, insurance forms lie, buildings do not. A burn pattern is a sentence, and if you learn the grammar, you can read it out loud. I retired at 62 with a small pension, a bad left knee, and every intention of doing absolutely nothing for the rest of my life. I got 11 months. My son's name is Ji-hoon. He is 38 years old. Before all of this, he coached boys football at a high school in Songpa. Not the famous kind of coach. The other kind, the kind who knows which boy's father drinks, which boy is eating 1 meal a day and pretending otherwise, which boy is fast but will quit the first time somebody shouts at him and therefore must never be shouted at. He took that school to the National Schools League 4 years running. Parents drove their sons in from Gyeonggi to play for him. I once watched him stand in front of 60 teenage boys and quiet every one of them without raising his voice above the level you'd use to order noodles. He got that from his father. He did not get it from me. I am a woman who raises her voice. Then came the accident. A Tuesday night in November. Raining the way it rains in Seoul in November. Not hard, just relentless. Everything gray and shining and doubled. Ji-hoon was driving home along Olympic Dairo. A delivery truck came through the light at the Jamsil underpass at 80 kilometers an hour and took the driver's side of his car. He was 31 years old. At the hospital, the trauma surgeon put the scan up and showed me a word I carried in my pocket for years afterward like a coin. He said the spinal cord was compressed, not severed, compressed, at the T10 vertebra. He said that with proper rehabilitation, we should expect significant motor recovery within 12 to 18 months. He used the word temporary. That was the last time in 7 years that anyone said that word about my son. I'm going to stop right here for a moment because the next part is where the ground starts moving, and I'd rather you were sitting down for it. If you're still with me, tap that like button. It genuinely helps an old woman's stories find the people who need them. Subscribe so you don't lose me halfway. And tell me in the comments, where are you tonight? What city? What room? What hour? I want to know who I'm talking to. My daughter-in-law's name is Han Da-eun. She is 34 now, which means she was 27 when the truck hit my son. Hold that number, 27. Come back to it later, because when I finally understood what it meant, I had to sit down on the concrete floor of a storage unit in Seoul and put my head between my knees. She was a pharmaceutical sales representative when they married, and by the time of the accident, she'd been promoted twice. Beautiful in an efficient way, the kind of woman whose hair does exactly the same thing every single day. She kept her own surname in public and used my son's on paperwork, and at the time I thought that was modern, and I liked her for it. I want to be honest with you about something, because I think a story owes you honesty or it isn't worth your evening. I liked her. I liked her enormously. When Ji-hoon first brought her to the house, she took off her shoes at the step and turned them to face the door without being told, and she asked about the persimmon tree, and when I said my husband planted it the year Ji-hoon was born, she put her hand on my arm and said, "Then we should never let anything happen to it." 7 years later, I would learn she had been researching my son's insurability before that dinner, but she said that thing about the tree, and she meant it in the moment, or she was good enough that there is no difference. I have thought about that one sentence more than almost anything else in this entire story. Within 72 hours of the accident, Da-een had control of everything. She was extraordinary. I want to say that clearly, because if you have never watched someone do this, you will not understand how it works. It does not look like a takeover. It looks like relief. I was 64 years old. I had just watched them cut my son out of a car, and this young woman stood in a hospital corridor with a folder under her arm and said, "Iomeoni, you don't have to think about any of this. I've got it." Do you know what that felt like? It felt like someone catching me. She brought in a specialist, Dr. Seoul Min, 58, neurosurgeon, private clinic in Gangnam, a face you might half recognize from morning health programs. Quiet handshake, unhurried. 3 board certifications printed on a card so heavy it felt like a small tile in my hand. He reviewed the imaging. He spoke with Da-eun in the corridor for 20 minutes while I sat in the family area holding a paper cup of barley tea I never drank. Then he came in, sat down across from me, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and told me, with real sorrow in his eyes, and I am a woman who has spent her life reading people, and I could not find the lie, that the compression had caused permanent nerve destruction, that the emergency assessment had been premature and frankly irresponsible, that my son would not walk again. And I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He had the credentials, she had the paperwork, and I was a retired woman who used to read soot on walls. Not a neurosurgeon. Not anyone. I moved into their house that same month. Let me tell you what 7 years looks like, because people say it fast and it goes by in a breath, and it should not. 7 years is 2,557 mornings. Every one of them, I woke at 5:40. I went into his room. I said, Igo, our coach, good morning, the same way every day, because routine is the only mercy available in a house like that. I helped him sit. I moved his legs to the edge of the bed with my hands under his knees, one and then the other, the way you'd move something breakable and beloved. I got him into the chair. I took him to the bathroom. I washed him for the first 4 years, until his arms were strong enough to manage most of it himself. And I'll tell you, a mother washing her grown son is not humiliating for the mother. It was only ever humiliating for him. That was the part I could not fix. And every morning, Daun made his breakfast. She was magnificent at it. Everything cut small, everything warm. She would grind his medications, she called them nerve stabilizers and antispasmodics, and stir the powder into a glass of pear juice because he had said once, in the first month, that the pills made his throat close up. She remembered that. For 7 years. She would hand him the glass with both hands, the way you hand something to an elder, and she would smile, and she would wait until he had finished all of it. 2,557 times. And by 9 o'clock he was foggy. By noon, exhausted. By 8 in the evening, asleep, often earlier. He lost words. He would begin a sentence about the boys at the school and lose the end of it and simply stop, mid-air, and then look at me with an expression I still cannot describe and say, "Sorry, Ioma, what was I saying? I thought it was the injury. I thought it was grief. I thought it was what happens to a man who was a body, who lived in his body, who ran and shouted and stood out in the rain for 2 extra hours because the boys were still practicing, when his body stops being a place he can live. I thought I was watching depression. I was watching a dose. If you have ever sat beside someone you love and thought, I am losing them, and I don't know why, hit that like button for me. Not for the algorithm, for yourself, for however long you carried that. Subscribe if you haven't. We are not even halfway. The morning she left for Jeju was the 21st of October. She'd been planning the trip for 4 months, a regional distributor conference with a Busan leg tacked on the end, 10 days. Her luggage stood by the door 2 days early, 3 matching cream-colored cases, each with a small gold tag. She hugged me at the step. She smelled like the same perfume she had worn for 7 years. She said, Iomioni, don't lift him alone. Please, wait for the helper on Thursday. Then the taxi took her, and the gate clicked, and I stood in my own front yard in the cold, and felt something I had not felt since the year of the accident. Quiet. Not the careful quiet of a house where somebody is always performing. Real quiet. The kind that settles into the walls after a storm has finally gone over the mountain and away. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window. The ginkgo along the alley wall had gone completely yellow overnight, the way they do, all at once, like the whole street agreed on it. Old Mrs. Beck from 2 doors down had left 4 persimmons on the gatepost, which is a thing she does and has never once mentioned. I had no plan. That was the luxury. No clipboard, no list on the refrigerator in Daun's round, patient handwriting. I thought, when he wakes up, I'll take him out to the back step. We'll sit in the cold. Maybe I'll switch on the little television that Hosik, his old assistant coach, mounted out there 2 summers ago so Ji-hoon could watch matches without being indoors. At 7:43, I heard a sound. Not the wheels. I knew the wheels. 7 years. I knew that sound the way you know a clock in your own house. The particular hum on the hallway floor. The small knock where the boards meet at the doorway. This was heavier. A shoulder hitting a wall. A sharp breath sucked in. Then a thud that shook the frames along the corridor. I moved. 33 years of walking toward the sound instead of away from it. Your body keeps it. Even at 71. even with a bad knee. I came around the corner with my heart already ahead of me, and I stopped so hard my socks slid on the wood. My son was standing, both palms flat against the wall, his arms shaking like beams in a structure carrying weight it was never rated for. His legs, the legs I had lifted and turned and positioned and strapped into footrest 2,557 consecutive mornings, were bent at the knee and trembling so hard I could see the fabric of his trousers moving. But they were holding him. He was breathing like a man who had just come up from deep water, every breath deliberate, every breath a decision. Ji-hoon, I said. I said it so quietly, I am not certain any sound came out of me at all. He turned his head. His face was gray and running with sweat, and his eyes were the clearest I had seen them in 7 years, not fogged, not drifting off toward the window in the middle of a sentence. Sharp, terrified, completely, entirely present. Ioma, he said. His voice came out like a door dragged over gravel. We have to go, right now, before it wears off. I did not ask what it was. I want you to understand that. I crossed that hallway in 4 steps and got my shoulder up under his arm, and I did not ask a single question, because there is a kind of knowing that arrives before information does, and in that moment I already understood that everything I had believed for 7 years was going to have to be taken apart down to the studs. He was heavier than I remembered, or I was older, both probably. We went down that hallway together in a slow, grinding shuffle that took 3.5 minutes, and I have crossed rivers that cost me less. At the door he stopped and looked at his shoes lined up on the step. The good ones, the ones nobody had needed to move in 7 years, and he made a sound I am not going to describe to you. I got him into my truck. I drive a 15-year-old bongo. The whole family thinks it's ridiculous. I keep it because the bed holds equipment and because I am not finished being a person who might one day need to carry equipment. He collapsed against the passenger window, chest going like a bellows. I did not start the engine. I sat with both hands on the wheel and looked at the side of my son's face, and I said, carefully, the way I used to speak to survivors standing in front of what used to be their homes. Tell me. All of it. Take as long as you need. He talked for 40 minutes. I did not interrupt once. The accident was real. The compression was real. The pain was real. The prognosis was a lie. The emergency surgeon had been correct. 12 to 18 months of targeted rehabilitation. That was all my son had ever needed. That was the entire distance between the life he had and the life that was taken from him. Ji-hoon had been in contact with Dr. So Gwang-min for 3 weeks before the accident. Ji-hoon discovered it 18 months ago, entirely by chance. She'd shared a cloud folder to their household tablet to send him a photograph, and hadn't restricted it properly. He opened it looking for the picture. He found correspondence instead. Dates that could not be arranged into any innocent order. Transfers he did not recognize. And then, in the subject line of a message from an insurance brokerage he had never heard of, his own name. And he said nothing. For 18 months, he said nothing. This is the part I need you to sit with, because it is the part that took me longest to survive. He was heavily medicated then. He was swimming. He told me there were entire weeks he could not be certain what had actually happened and what he had dreamed. He said he once spent 4 days believing he had spoken with his father, who has been dead since 2011. He thought he was losing his mind. He genuinely believed the most likely explanation for what he had seen was that he was no longer a reliable witness to his own life. So he waited, and he watched her. He learned her calendar. He learned which mornings she stayed in the kitchen and which mornings she stepped out to take a call. He learned that she never, not once in 7 years, looked back at him from the doorway. and 23 days before that October morning, he began holding his medication under his tongue. Every morning, the pear juice, both hands, the smile, the waiting. And every morning after she left the room, he wheeled himself into the bathroom and spat it into the drain and ran the tap for a count of 30. The fog lifted the way a sky clears after a long rain, slowly, in patches. He said the first thing that came back was smell, that on the fourth day he could smell the soap in the bathroom, and he sat there and cried because he had not known it was gone. And at night, while she slept in the next room, he lowered himself out of the bed onto the floor and made his legs take weight. An inch, then a hand's width. Then, on the 11th night, a full stand against the bedroom wall in the dark, shaking so hard his teeth knocked together, holding it for 9 seconds, counting, because a coach counts. 7 years of chemical stillness had taken his legs down to almost nothing. He was rebuilding a body out of 9-second increments in the dark, 4 meters from the woman who had done it to him. And he was waiting for one thing. He was waiting for the day she would leave the house. I gripped that steering wheel until the leather creased under my hands. The anger I felt was not the hot kind. It was not the kind that makes you shout. It was the slow, structural kind, the kind that moves through a building inside the walls, in the hidden spaces, taking the strength out of everything while the surface still looks fine. I knew that kind. I had spent my whole career learning to respect it. I asked him where he needed to go. He looked out the windshield at the yellow ginkgo and told me to drive to a self-storage facility in Songsu-dong, Unit 34B. He said Diane kept the key on a ring in her coat pocket, and that 3 months ago, during one of the brief clear windows the tapering allowed him, he had taken that ring while she was out and had a copy cut at a shop 2 stations away and put the original back before she came home. My son, in a wheelchair, with a stranger's mind in his head. We're about to open that storage unit, and I'll be honest, I have told this story out loud maybe a dozen times, and I have never once gotten through this next part without stopping. If this is holding you, please like the video and subscribe, and leave me one word in the comments before we go in. Just one, whatever you're feeling right now. We drove without speaking. The October light came sideways through the trees, along the river road, in long flat bars, and I kept my eyes forward and tried to build a picture of who my daughter-in-law actually was. I could not do it. 7 years of data and I could not assemble a person out of it. The unit was a small concrete room with a rolling metal shutter and one bare fluorescent tube. I rolled the shutter up and the light came on with that little electrical cough they make. The first thing I saw was file boxes, 11 of them, stacked in 2 neat rows, each one labeled in Da-eun's handwriting, that round, patient handwriting from the refrigerator. Behind them, a fireproof safe the size of a small refrigerator. Ji-hoon knew the combination. He'd watched her open it on a video call she didn't know he could see the reflection of. Inside were documents that turned 7 years of my life inside out like a sleeve. The settlement. After the accident, the civil claim against the trucking company's insurer had settled for 12 billion won. Da-eun told the entire family that money was locked in a protected medical trust, untouchable, administered by a law firm in Yeouido, invested conservatively to fund my son's lifetime of care. She showed us paperwork. She cried when she explained it. My sister held her hand. There was no trust. The money had moved through 3 paper companies she registered in Seoul, Incheon and Gimpo, over 2 years, and then out through a holding entity registered offshore. What was left of it was sitting in a private investment account in her name alone. What she had spent was itemized in those 11 boxes, and she had kept the records beautifully, the way only someone who has never once imagined being caught will keep records. 2 officitals in Songdo, a serviced apartment building in Gapyeong, and a 40% stake in a private rehabilitation clinic in Suwon, a rehabilitation clinic. She used my paralyzed son's settlement to buy into a business that rehabilitates paralyzed people, while I changed his sheets and cut his food into small pieces every morning for 7 years. The policies. Second box. 4 insurance policies. 3 of them on Ji-hoon's life. Taken out at different times, through 3 different insurers, using 2 different brokers, each one naming Han Da-eun as sole beneficiary. Combined death benefit, 8.4 billion won. The 4th was different. The 4th was a long-term disability policy with an accelerated benefit clause, meaning it paid out a lump sum immediately if the insured received a qualifying terminal diagnosis. Not on death, on diagnosis. The email. Clipped to the bottom of that 4th policy with a black binder clip was a single printed page. An email from Dr. Seo Gwang-min, sent 4 days before she flew to Jeju. Everything is prepared on my end. The diagnostic documentation will be finalized upon your confirmation. Cause: progressive neurological deterioration, consistent with long-term spinal compression syndrome. Untreatable. Estimated timeline: 6 to 8 weeks. Let me know when you would like to proceed. I read it 4 times. Then I set it down on top of the safe, very carefully, the way you set down evidence, and I looked at my son. He was sitting in my old folding camp chair with his hands on his knees and his eyes on the floor. She isn't coming back from a conference, I said. No, he said, she isn't. That is when I sat down on the concrete, because I had done the arithmetic. She was 27 years old when she started this. 27. She had planned a thing that would take 7 years to mature, and then she had gotten up every single morning for 7 years and cut my son's food into small pieces and remembered that pills hurt his throat. The silence in that storage unit was the loudest thing I have ever heard, and I have stood inside buildings while they finished collapsing. My first instinct, the one that fires before you think, was to drive straight to the district station, put every document on the nearest detective's desk, and let the law do what the law is for. That is what a reasonable person does. That is what someone who trusts the system does. But I spent 33 years in fire investigation, and I understand one thing about evidence better than I understand almost anything else in this world. Evidence is only as strong as the person carrying it and the authority receiving it. I have watched perfect evidence die in a room. I have watched a man walk away from a fire he set because the investigator who proved it was tired that day and the loss adjuster had a better suit. If I had walked into a police station that afternoon, here is exactly what would have happened. Da-eun held my son's medical power of attorney. She had held it for 7 years. Her lawyer would have had a response inside of 2 hours, and it would not have been a denial. It would have been a story, and it would have been a good one. A story about a grieving 71-year-old mother-in-law, worn down by 7 years of caregiving, who had constructed an elaborate conspiracy to explain a tragedy she could not accept. A story about a devoted wife who gave up her career in her 20s, now being persecuted by a bitter family. And Ji-hoon? A man whose own medical file, signed by a board-certified neurosurgeon who appears on television, described him as severely and permanently neurologically impaired. Suddenly standing, suddenly talking, suddenly accusing his caregiver of attempted murder. The system would have looked at my son and seen precisely what Da-eun spent 7 years building for it to see. An unstable, compromised patient making claims his own records contradicted. We did not need proof of what she had done. We needed her in the act. I laid it out for Ji-hoon in that storage unit, step by step, the way I used to brief a team before a walkthrough. He listened the way he used to listen on a touchline, completely still, taking it all in, already 3 moves ahead. When I finished, he said one thing. Ioma, if this goes wrong, it goes wrong on me, not on you. I told him he was 38 years old and still did not understand the first thing about mothers. We drove home. Here's where an old fire investigator gets to be useful for the first time in 9 years. If you want to see how a 71-year-old woman wires her own house, like the video, and stay with me, and tell me honestly in the comments, would you have gone to the police? Or would you have done what I did? I want to know. When you investigate a fire, you do not simply document a scene as it is. Any clerk can do that. You anticipate what the fire would have done next. You get out ahead of it. I had kept my kit. Of course I had kept my kit. In a plastic case in the back of the bongo, 2 high-definition compact cameras I'd used for scene documentation, a set of wide-angle lenses, 3 lapel microphones, and a roll of the gray adhesive we used for mounting in wet conditions. Here is what I did between 11 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. Camera 1 went behind the kitchen range hood, angled down at the counter, the exact stretch of countertop where Ji-hoon had prepared my son's medication every morning for 7 years. I had watched her stand in that spot 2,500 times. I knew precisely where her hands would be. Camera 2 went inside the hallway smoke detector housing. I took the detector apart at the table, hollowed it, mounted the lens behind the vent slots, and put it back on the ceiling. It still worked as a smoke detector. I am not a person who disables a smoke detector. That gave me the full living room and the front door. A microphone went into the return vent in the upstairs hallway on the wall shared with their bedroom. And then, the part that mattered most. I did not put any of it on the house network. Both feeds uploaded continuously to a cloud server through a mobile hotspot on a prepaid data SIM I bought that afternoon at a convenience store 2 neighborhoods away and paid for in cash. If she touched the router, if she pulled the internet, if she found and smashed every device in that house, the footage was already gone, already sitting on a server she could not reach, in a place she did not know existed. Then I went into my son's room and we rehearsed. He would be in the chair when she came in, chin low, eyes soft and unfocused. He practiced it in front of me, and it was so accurate that I had to look away. He would take whatever she gave him and not swallow it. And I would be exactly what I had been for 7 years. Visible, tired, unremarkable. An old woman in an armchair with a library paperback, grateful to be allowed to help. That was the hardest instruction, not for him, for me, because I would have to look at her and smile and pour her tea. We had 3 days before she was due back. She came back in 2, 11:47 at night, the second evening. I was in the living room with the paperback open on my knee, not reading a word of it, when I heard the gate and then the front door. Diane came in wearing a dove gray travel coat, pulling the cream cases behind her. And the first thing she did, before she set down her bag, before she took off her coat, before she said a single word to either of us, was look at the kitchen counter, at the pill organizer. Her eyes went there before they went to her husband, before they went to me. I noted it. 33 years of investigation teaches you that where a person's eyes go first tells you what they have been thinking about hardest. Then she turned and gave me a wide, warm smile and said the conference had been cut short. A reorganization in her division, everyone sent home early. She was so sorry she hadn't called ahead. She hoped we hadn't been struggling. And I looked at her, and I understood something that made the back of my neck go cold. She looked rested, not disappointed, not stressed. Her face had color in it. Her eyes were bright. She looked like a woman who had completed something, not a woman whose plans had collapsed. I smiled back and told her we were glad she was home early. I told her the persimmons had come. I asked if she'd eaten. She crossed to Ji-hoon's chair, stroked the hair back off his forehead, and murmured something to him I couldn't hear from where I sat. He sat perfectly slack, chin down, eyes gone soft and far away. The exact vacancy she had designed and paid for. The camera behind the range hood recorded every second of it. That night I lay in my room in the dark with an earpiece pushed so far into my ear it ached, listening to the microphone in the vent. At 12:30 in the morning, Ji-hoon sat down on the edge of her bed and made a call on a phone I had never seen in that house. I could hear the difference, the flat little click of a cheap prepaid handset. She kept her voice low. But that vent ran the length of the upstairs hallway, and sound moves through a house the way heat does. It finds the path. She said she was back early. She said everything was in position. She said she needed the documentation ready no later than Friday. And then she said, "Let's just get it done. I've waited long enough." I lay in the dark with that sentence pressing on my chest like a hand. I've waited long enough. 7 years of pear juice. 7 years of remembering his throat. 7 years of Iomeoni. You don't have to think about any of this. I did not sleep. At 4 in the morning I got up, put on my coat, and went out through the back door into the cold. 4 in the morning, 71 years old, driving across Seoul with a recording on my phone. Like the video if you're still with me. Subscribe if you want the ending, and I promise you, the ending is worth staying for, not the arrest, the part after the arrest. Comment where you're watching from. I'll be reading. I drove to the Seoul Metropolitan Police Agency, not the local station. I had worked twice in my career with the Intelligent Crime Investigation Unit, both times on arson for insurance cases, both times as the fire side of a financial investigation. The officer on the night desk was a woman in her 30s named Inspector Ji-hoon, and she had the flat, unimpressed expression of somebody who has heard 400 walk-in tips that amounted to nothing. I put my phone on her desk. I showed her the storage unit photographs, the policy documents, the Seoul email, and then I played her the recording from 3 hours earlier. She listened to it once. Then she listened to it again. Then she picked up her desk phone and called her supervisor at home. What followed was 2 hours in a windowless room with 3 officers and a legal pad. I laid the whole architecture out, the settlement, the paper companies, the 4 policies, the fabricated prognosis, the surgeon's email, the burner phone call. I did it the way I would have presented a fire origin, in order, from the point of ignition outward, no speculation, everything sourced. At one point, the supervisor, a heavy-set man named Nam Tae-ho, senior superintendent, who had said almost nothing, stopped me and asked who had prepared the summary I was reading from. I told him I had. He looked at me for a moment and then said, "Where did you serve?" And I told him, and something in the room changed, and I stopped being a distraught mother-in-law and started being a colleague. And I want to tell you that after 33 years of walking into rooms and being handed a cup of tea instead of a file, that mattered to me more than it should have. Then Nam Tae-ho told me something I was not expecting. For 14 months, his unit had been working a network of medical professionals manufacturing diagnoses for insurance fraud. They had the financial patterns. They had a list of suspicious deaths. They had Dr. Seo Gwang-min's name. What they had never been able to get, not once in 14 months, was a recorded communication between a medical conspirator and a beneficiary that established intent before the act. I had just put one on his desk. But it was not enough. He was honest with me about that, and I respected him for it. A competent defense would call that recording ambiguous, and they would be right to. She never says a diagnosis. She never says kill. She says get it done. She says I've waited long enough. Those are phrases. They are not a confession. And then Nam Taeho looked at me with the flat expression of a man about to ask for something unreasonable, and he asked it. I had to go back. I had to let her proceed far enough to commit the act. Officers would have the house covered, vehicles at both ends of the alley, a tactical team 2 blocks out, an ambulance staged at the fire station around the corner, which I want you to appreciate the irony of. But I could not intervene when she administered it. They needed to recover the substance and document the attempt in real time. I am 71 years old. I have carried bodies out of buildings. I have told parents that their children were not coming home. I did that 4 times in my career, and I remember all 4 names. I have sat in parking lots with widows and read them loss reports that turned a human being into a line item. That was the hardest thing anyone has ever asked me to do. I drove home in the gray before dawn and sat in the truck in front of my own gate for a long time. Then I went inside, put my shoes on the step facing the door, and lay down on the bed in the little room off the kitchen and looked at the ceiling until the light came. The next day and a half moved the way time moves before something irreversible, too slow and too fast at once. Diane moved through that house with a particular energy, focused, efficient, humming in the kitchen. She made me a proper breakfast on Thursday, which she had not done in years, and asked about my knee. She told me about a restaurant on Jeju she said I would love, and that she wanted to take me there in the spring. I said that sounded lovely. I poured her tea. I passed her the newspaper. I played the part I had played for 7 years without ever knowing I was playing it. The grateful, tired old woman who has no idea what is coming. And here's the thing I have never been able to explain to anyone. Somewhere in those 36 hours, I stopped being afraid, and I got very, very calm. The same calm I used to get about 4 minutes into a burned-out room, when the noise in my head stopped, and the structure started talking. On Friday evening at 8:10, she went to the pantry and came out with a small navy nylon case I had never seen in my life. She unzipped it on the counter with her back half turned to me. I kept my eyes on the television. But out of the side of my vision, in the reflection of the dark window, I watched her hands work with a glass vial and a syringe. Not a pill organizer, not pear juice, a syringe. The camera behind the range hood saw all of it. Clean, lit, from above. She came into the living room with the syringe cupped in her palm, cap still on, moving with the easy confidence of a woman who had either done this before or had rehearsed it in her mind so many times that it had the texture of memory. She knelt down beside my son's chair. Her voice went to that high, soft register. She called him Yobo. She said it was time for his evening treatment. She said this was a new medicine and it would help him sleep more deeply, and that he deserved to rest. She said, "You've been so tired, haven't you?" I sat in my armchair with a library paperback open in my lap, and I gripped the pages hard enough to bend them, and I did not move. Do you understand what I am telling you? My son was 4 meters away from me, and I did not move. She reached for the port in his IV line, a line she had arranged 3 months earlier through a home care order, one more piece of infrastructure quietly installed for exactly this evening. She took the cap off the needle, and the front door came off its hinges. There was no knock, no shout first, just the full mechanical concussion of a forced entry performed by people who practice it. The door frame split down the side. Officers came through the opening in under 2 seconds. Vests, torch beams crossing the room, 3 voices stacked on top of one another giving commands. Da-un lurched backward. The syringe hit the floor and skittered under the low table. 2 officers had her arms before she found her balance. She did not scream. She did not cry. For about 4 seconds she tried to arrange her face into the expression of a terrified, innocent woman, and I watched her do it. I watched her reach for it, and it was the only time in 7 years I ever saw her be slow at something. Because the cuffs were already on, and Inspector Bake was already coming through the broken door with an evidence bag, and I saw the exact moment Ji-hoon understood that there had been a camera in that house the entire time, that everything had been seen, that the old woman in the armchair with the paperback had wired the ceiling, and the performance stopped. She turned her head and looked at me, not with rage, not with shame, not even with hatred, which I think I could have understood. With contempt. The way a contractor looks at you when you've noticed he used the cheap materials. Annoyed, inconvenienced, as though I had been rude. She never said one word to me. Not that night, not at trial, not ever. She had nothing left that would work on me, and she was far too efficient to waste breath. They walked her out through the broken doorway, past the shoes lined up on the step. I crossed the room to my son. He was breathing hard, both hands locked on the arms of the chair. And when I put my hand on his shoulder, he reached up and grabbed my wrist, the way a man grabs something when he is frightened of what he might do if he lets go. "She's gone," I told him. He nodded once. His jaw was locked so tight I could see the muscle moving. He was shaking, but he was there, completely, entirely there. No fog, no drift, just my son. And then he said, and this is the sentence I will be hearing on the day I die. He said, "Ioma, I'm sorry it took me so long to come back." 7 years. He apologized to me. I put my forehead against the top of his head, the way I used to when he was small and had done something he thought was unforgivable, and I told him what I have told him every day since. You were never gone. You were just underwater. And I would have waited another 7. That's the arrest. But it isn't the story. The story is what happens to a man who has to learn to be a person again. And I'm going to tell you all of it, including the sweet part, because there is a sweet part, and you have earned it. Like the video, subscribe, and I'd love to know, is there someone you'd wait 7 years for? Tell me about them. The substance in the syringe was identified within 36 hours. I am not going to say what it was on this channel, and I want you to understand why, because somewhere out there is another Ji-hoon, and I am not going to hand her a recipe. What I will tell you is that it would have looked like exactly what Dr. So had already written down. A man with a long-standing spinal injury declining and passing quietly in the night. Dr. Se-Gwang-min was arrested at his Gangnam clinic within the hour. 2 more people in the network were picked up before morning. One of them a claims assessor at an insurer who had approved 4 policies she should have flagged. The case went to the prosecutor's office and the charges came back. Attempted murder, fraud by computer, breach of trust, and unlawful confinement. Her lawyer filed everything you would expect. None of it landed. There is very little a defense can do with high-definition footage from 2 angles. A recovered syringe, 7 years of financial records in the defendant's own handwriting, and a co-conspirator surgeon who signed a cooperation agreement in the first week because he was 58 years old and had no interest in dying inside. She was convicted on all counts 14 months later. 38 years. I sat in the 3rd row of that courtroom and watched the officer walk her out, and people have asked me many times what I felt. Nothing. The clean, empty nothing of a thing that is genuinely finished. Like the moment on a fire scene when you finally write the cause down on the form and the room stops talking to you. Most of the money came back. Not all of it. It never is all of it. But the office hotels were sold, and the clinic stake was unwound, and there was enough left to pay for what came next, which is the only justice I actually cared about. I want to be honest about the recovery because I think stories owe people the truth about what recovery actually looks like, and most of them lie. It was not a montage. 7 years of enforced stillness does real damage. Muscle goes, bone density goes. His nervous system had to relearn a conversation it had been chemically prevented from having. There was a period around month 2 when he could not sleep at all, when his legs woke up and hurt so much that he sat in the dark and shook. And there were 2 nights he told me he wished it had just been true. I did not argue with him on those nights. I sat on the floor beside the bed with my back against the frame, which is bad for my knee, and I stayed until it got light. 3 months before he could walk the length of the hallway unassisted. 6 months before he could manage stairs, and he did the first flight at the physiotherapy center in Cheonho, and when he got to the top, he turned around and looked down at me and laughed. I had not heard it in 8 years, and I did not recognize the sound. His physiotherapist was a woman named Jung Hae-rin, 41, blunt, entirely unimpressed by him. On their first session, he apologized for how slow he was, and she said, "Don't apologize to me, apologize to your left leg. It's the one doing the work." He came home that day irritated for the first time in 7 years. Irritated? Do you know what a gift that was? Someone had spoken to my son like a man instead of a condition, and it made him cross, and I went into the kitchen and put my hands over my face. "I'm going to come back to Hae-rin. Be patient with me." 11 months in, Hosik, his old assistant coach, who had visited that house every single month for 7 years and never once been thanked properly by anyone, asked him to come and watch a Friday match. Not to coach, just to sit. Ji-hoon said no 4 times. The 5th time, he said yes. He walked in. He used a cane and it took him a long while, and he was gray in the face by the time he sat down, but he walked into that ground on his own legs. They found out at halftime. I don't know who spotted him. 32 boys came up off that pitch and into the stand and stood around him in a half circle, these enormous muddy teenagers, none of whom had ever met him, all of whom had heard about him, holding their shirts and not knowing what to say. And my son looked up at them and said, "Yeah, sit down, you're blocking the pitch." They sat down, all 32, in the stand, around him. They lost that match by 1 goal, and it did not matter to a single person present. He went back to coaching in the 3rd year. Part-time first, then properly. He cannot stand for a full session and never will, so he coaches from a folding chair on the touchline, and the boys have decided this is an intimidating power move rather than a limitation, and he has not corrected them. He is a better coach now than he was before. I have watched him. He was always good with the boy whose father drinks. Now he is unbelievable with him. There are things you cannot teach a man about patience, and there is only one way to learn them, and I would rather he had never learned, but he did, and it did not go to waste. And Jung Hae-rin. They were friends for 2 years first. She would come by the house with terrible instant coffee and argue with him about his exercises. She was the only person alive who never treated him like something that had happened. She treated him like a slightly disappointing student. I knew before either of them did. Mothers always do. I said nothing for 11 months, which anyone who knows me will tell you is the single greatest act of restraint of my entire life. They married last spring. Small, 22 people. He walked. Slowly, with a cane. And he stopped once in the middle and everybody pretended not to notice, and Hae-rin absolutely did not pretend. She said, out loud, in front of everyone, "Take your time, I've got nowhere to be." And he laughed, and he came the rest of the way. Hosik cried harder than anyone. Mrs. Bake, from 2 doors down, brought persimmons. And there's a granddaughter now. She is 14 months old. Her name is Yoon, and she has recently learned that if she holds onto her father's trouser leg, she can pull herself up onto her feet. He lets her do it 40 times a day. He never once says he's tired. I watch them from the kitchen window, and I think about a hallway at 7:43 in the morning, and a man holding himself up against a wall for 9 seconds in the dark, counting. The persimmon tree is still in the yard. Nothing ever happened to it. I am 71 years old. I spent 33 years reading fires, and the thing that never changed, not once, not in 3 decades, not in a single scene I ever worked, is this. The fires that destroy a house are almost never the ones that start loudly. They start inside the walls, in the hidden spaces, burning slowly through the structure, while everything on the surface still looks perfectly fine. By the time you can see it, the beams are already gone, and people say afterward, "It happened so fast." It did not happen fast. It happened for years, quietly, in a place nobody was looking. So let me leave you with what I know. The people who harm you most are almost never the ones you never trusted. They are the ones you trusted completely, because trust is the only door big enough for that much damage to come through. Pay attention when something feels wrong inside a situation that looks right. That feeling is data. I ignored it for 7 years because I could not produce a document to support it, and a feeling with no document is still evidence. It just means you haven't found the document yet. A loving caregiver does not isolate you. A devoted partner does not require your helplessness in order to function. Watch who benefits from your weakness. Watch who gets quietly larger while you get quietly smaller. And trust your own eyes, even when every credential and every kind smile in the room is telling you that you are a confused old woman who does not understand medicine. I was a confused old woman who did not understand medicine. I understood fire. It turned out to be enough. If you are living inside somebody else's careful design tonight, and some of you are, and you know exactly who you thought of when I said that, I want you to hear this from someone who has been there and come out the other side. The truth has a way of finding its own exit. Even when every door has been locked, even after 7 years, sometimes it walks into the kitchen at 7:43 in the morning and holds onto the counter with both hands. Have you ever realized that someone you trusted was not who you believed they were? Tell me about it in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from tonight and how old you are and whether you're alone in the house right now, because I like knowing. If this story stayed with you, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and send it to one person who needs to hear it. You already know which one. I'm Yoon. Lock your doors, trust your gut, and go and call your mother.